You're listening to the Two Tongues Podcast. And now your hosts, Kyle and Chris.
Welcome back, one and all, to another episode of the Two Tongues Podcast. Tongue-tied this morning. Today I'm bringing you some opinion scholarship early on in Season 6. This one is going to surround what I call Great Mother Monism. It's a type of monotheism that I propose was nearly universal in our sort of earliest stages of human civilization. If you go back to the Stone Age, you seem to find something that resembles a monotheism, not one that we would recognize today necessarily in the Judeo-Christian tradition, but I think a monotheism nonetheless. This episode was inspired by really another podcast I was listening to. It was called the History Valley podcast, which we'll talk a little bit about here in a bit. And what it did was the host of the show, Jacob Berman, was speaking to a lady named Dr. Margaret Barker, about a related topic, and she's a biblical scholar. So what I mean to say is this topic we're going to be discussing today is going to be tied into biblical scholarship in a way that was very surprising to me. So I'm going to kind of keep that sucker punch in my back pocket until the very end of this. I want to kind of tell you a story and lead into it. But that's what we're going to do today. So without further ado, I will jump right in. Okay, so it was a common intuition in antiquity for, quote unquote, the divine, however you may want to define that, or however they may have defined that, to be thought of symbolically as something that's both male and female simultaneously. And in one of humanity's earliest surviving myths, from the old Babylonian Enuma Elish, this is, 1800 BC, we have a prime example of this. So let me just read to you the opening lines from the Enuma Elish, and you'll get the picture. It begins like this. When on high, no name was given to heaven, nor below was the netherworld called by name. When none of the gods had been brought into being, then Apsu, the first one, their begetter, and Tiamat, she who bore them all, mingled the waters together as a single body. Hear that last part again. Mingled their waters together as a single body. So the primordial god and goddess, Tiamat and Apsu, in the beginning, before anything was created, what were they? A single body. They were one God. Okay, here we have the primordial divine being described as the union of masculine freshwater, Apsu, and feminine saltwater, Tiamat. One being, both male and female. We see this pattern absolutely everywhere in our oldest myths, where gods are consistently paired with a feminine consort. So you have such illustrious examples as Osiris and Isis, Ouranos and Gaia, Odin and Frigg, Zeus and Hera, Brahma and Sarasvati. See, this is particularly prevalent in ancient Egyptian religion, where the 8 central gods, the so-called Ogdoad, were broken up into god and goddess pairs who share an essence and even a name. Each goddess is but the feminine version of the god. So you have Nu and Nonet, He and Hehet, Kek and Kokhet, and of course Amun and Amunet. For every god, there is his partner, his other half, so to speak. It seems the divine is incomplete somehow, unless it subsumes both the masculine and the feminine. And this makes sense when you consider God as the creator of all, when that all we're talking about includes both male and female. Even in the biblical tradition, that great exemplar of monotheism where God is one and only one, we see this very same thing. In Genesis 1, we get a description of God's image. Remember how it goes? So God created man in his own image. Male and female created he them. So God's image is both male and female. So even in the biblical God, we have a being that is both male and female. But if this is the case, where is the divine feminine in the Bible? Okay, we no doubt see the masculine divine expressed as the great God El and as Yahweh alternatively, but no feminine aspect to speak of, right? Well, it's been pointed out by many scholars that this isn't entirely true. We do have oblique references in the Bible and in the biblical tradition, echoes of a feminine element of the divine. We see her in the rabbinic literature as the Shekinah, which refers to the presence of God, and is often linked to the Spirit of God that's described in Genesis as hovering over the surface of the deep, over the pre-creation cosmos. We also see a feminine figure in the form of wisdom, that's Sophia in the Greek, who's described in Proverbs chapter 8 as a unique being who is eternally present with God. And in that chapter, she speaks from her own lips and says, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning." So this feminine deity, Sophia, wisdom, was there with God even before his works of old, even before he created the cosmos. So you can see the breadcrumb trails here. And these ideas extend to the Logos too, as described in John, making perhaps the Logos feminine by implication. And further from John, we find this Greek word Zoe, or life. It's a feminine proper name, directly associated with the Hebrew name for Eve, which also means life. And Zoe is there with God in the beginning. You don't believe me? Let's read it. John says, "In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. In him was Zoe." In him was life, right? And life was the light of men. In him was Zoe. But we're not quite done. There is yet one more fascinating example that bears on this discussion. Ashera. So she's mentioned in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, in Judges, and Kings, but in an unusual way. We're told that her image stood in the Jerusalem temple, and yet most of the passages which mention her speak of her worship as idolatry and blasphemy. But she was in the temple, in the house of God. What could this mean? It must mean that at one point she was deemed to belong there, the divine masculine together with the divine feminine. Now, why does that sound so familiar? Oh, that's right, because of the Kuntalit Ajrud inscriptions. Here, we find evidence that predates the Bible, carved into storage jars in the Sinai desert dating to the 9th century BC, which repeat the phrase, Yahweh and his Ashera, God and his goddess, as if they belonged together, as they were in the temple. How do we understand this? How do we make sense of a god and goddess in the so-called monotheism of ancient Israel? The answer to this question takes us back, way, way back. In our journey of opinion scholarship over the last 5 years, we've encountered over and over again the idea of the Great Mother. The further back in time we go, the more prevalent she becomes. From the dark mists of prehistory, we see flashes of her. Okay, the deep recesses of cave systems, you will recall, is where our Stone Age ancestors went to make religious representations and possibly to perform ritual. Famous examples include cave paintings at Lascaux, Chauvet, La Trois Frères Cave in France, and at Altamira in Spain. but we see them all over the world. Why? And why in caves? Well, the cave was seen symbolically as the womb of the earth. And the earth was seen as the mother of all, right? Mother Earth. So to enter the cave was to return to our place of primordial origin, back into the Great Mother, into the Holy of Holies. And not surprisingly, from this same epoch, we begin to see the very earliest idols being made. Carved figurines which predominantly depict what? A pregnant or very fertile-looking female form. The Great Mother. I want to show you some of these as well while we're doing this. So the first two I'm going to show you here are highly contested. These are stones that are very, very old, that seem to have been worked by man. But as you can see, based on the age of them, there's a lot of debate as to whether they're natural or not. But I want to show you at least that they're suspected to be. In this case, the Venus of Barakat Ram. And maybe as old as 700,000 years. And this was found in the Golan Heights. All right, next, the Venus of Tantan. All right, so this one, as you can see, a little bit younger. It could be as old as 500,000 years. This was found in Morocco. And you see, again, something similar here, which may be, again, a stone figurine, maybe natural, maybe made by man. There's a debate here, but you can see what appears to be a head, a body, arms, and legs. And significantly, what seems to be very large hanging breasts, right? On the last image, we saw something could be interpreted similarly. And as we continue, you can see here, without any debate whatsoever, a female form. This one dates to 40,000 BC. The Venus of Hohlfels. This one is from Germany. All right, let's continue here. How about the Venus of Galgenberg? Okay, this one's just a little bit newer, 30,000 BC, from Austria. And I do want to give you the feeling here that these things are coming from all over the place. So we have Israel, we have Morocco, we have Austria. Let's continue. How about this? The Venus of Dolní Věstonice. This is from the Czech Republic, 29,000 years. A very beautiful image, but you can see again, very wide hips, very large sort of hanging breasts, very indiscreet face, almost like it's so abstract, like it doesn't matter what the face is. What this represents is what the woman is in her essence. Represents fertility, and you can see what's being emphasized with the breasts and the hips, the things that are important for child rearing and childbearing, and are associated with fertility and things like that. Next, the famous Venus of Willendorf. I'll get a little bit younger, 28,000 BC. This one from Austria, very famous. Again, large breasts, large hips, perhaps even a pregnant image here. But pay attention to the face, and you'll notice it's not a person. There's no eyes, there's no nose, there's no mouth. There's this braided hair, and that's it. This doesn't represent a particular woman. It represents womanhood. It represents the feminine, the some mystical aspect to what it means to be a woman. How about this? The Venus of, I don't know how you pronounce this, La Selle, maybe? Again from France, 25,000 years. This one is not a figurine, but actually carved into the cave, deep into the cave, right? Where we see these cave paintings. Again, you have the breasts, you have the indiscreet face, you have the large hips, you have what appears to be a cornucopia or something else that you can see the connections again to fertility, maybe emphasized even more. And as we move forward in time, from Russia, the Venus of Avdivo, 22,000 years, all the same characteristics. How about this? From Çatalhöyük in Turkey, it's called the Seated Woman. Now we're kind of approaching the historical period, right on the edge here. Now this is 8,000 BC. But again, what do you see? a woman with an indiscreet face, large hips, large breasts. In this case, though, something a little bit more sovereign about her. She's sitting on a throne, and there's animals, in this case it appears to be lions or cats, on either side of her throne. A very regal image, something that shows you this abstract symbol of the feminine is a queen. Now we're getting into the historical period, 1800 BC in Old Babylon. We have this depiction of Ishtar, again surrounded by animals. You can see the lions there below her. How about the Phrygian Proto-Kybele figure here from Hattusa, 800 BC? You have this goddess figurine. You've got these two creatures on either side of her, like we saw before. And how about this? The Artemis Patina Theron from 800 BC. This one from Thebes. What do you see? You see the great goddess. You see the animals on either side flanking her. And we're getting into the historical period, deep into the historical period now. And we start seeing images like this, the mother of the gods from Thrace. This beautiful statue, 600 BC. Now we're approaching the time of the pre-Socratics, and the Plato's just around the corner here. And what do we have? We have this great goddess image with two lions on either side. And what is she doing? Sitting on a throne. The last one I want to show you is much later. This is a medieval depiction of the Norse goddess Freya. We don't have any statues, any historical statues or archaeological images of her, but we do have stories about Freya riding a chariot pulled by cats. And what you see here is an image very like we saw before. While she's not sitting on a throne, she's sitting in a chariot. And while she's not being, flanked by these cats, she's being pulled by them. And so you have what very clearly to me is a continuation of this same motif, going all the way back to as deep into prehistory as we could possibly go. And you can follow this thread all the way through to the medieval period. All right. Okay, so then from here, I want to point out that we're facing kind of precisely the opposite problem, right? Where in the Stone Age, dominated by these images of the divine feminine, where do we find this great God? I mean, he's as blatantly absent here as the Great Mother seems to be in the Bible, maybe even more so. Now, the reason in this instance isn't as obvious. It can't be dismissed on social grounds by alluding to patriarchy as would be common to assume on the other side. So what's going on here? To answer this question, I propose something that we might call Great Mother Monism, an early stage of religious consciousness dominated by the divine feminine. This implies that the idea of the divine in its earliest expressions, in the minds of our deepest ancestors, were strictly imagined as a goddess. The great God is missing, not because he's being ignored or suppressed, but because he has yet to be conceived. He remained latent in the religious imagination, still fetal and unborn. To our Stone Age ancestors living hand to mouth and struggling daily for survival, the idea of the divine surrounds, above all, the phenomena of life, the mystery of conception, the magic and danger of childbirth, the cycles of fruiting and growing, which find parallels in the menstrual cycle of human women. Even the most auspicious period of the hunt, when the likelihood of securing wild game was at its peak, this circled around the rut, the period of female fertility in the animal kingdom. They understood that life was the sacred thing, and that this great mystery is to be found at the core of womanhood. Beyond the individual mother, there is a pattern which expresses itself cosmically. Everything has an origin, a mother, even the cosmos itself. Everything is dependent upon its life-giving essence. All things grow and blossom and thrive upon it. And so, from the image of the feminine in agriculture, in animals, and in human beings, our earliest ancestors imagined the source of this pattern, the great cosmic mother, and the first idea of a goddess was born. As we move forward in time, examining the sparse material evidence from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, we always find the goddess. In time, she competes with the emergent idea of the masculine divine and reconciles him to herself, but she never goes away, never dies out. As civilization grows and cultural changes bring about so many religious revolutions, the goddess remains. In the religions of Mesopotamia and Egypt, we find her in the form of Ishtar, Inanna, and Isis. In Anatolia, she is Kubaba, who becomes the queen mother Cybele. In the Greek world, she morphs from form to form as Gaia, Rhea, Hera, Aphrodite, Hestia, and Artemis. The continuity of the Great Mother is unassailable. But what about the great God? Where and how does he enter the picture? In a way, he was right there all along, hidden in plain sight. In a sort of chicken and egg scenario, we have the Great Mother, but simultaneously within her, we have that very thing which makes her a mother. We have the child in her womb. The God is held in potential within the Great Mother. Just as the cosmos emerged from within her, the God too emerges from the cosmic womb. Many of humanity's earliest cosmological myths tell this tale. They speak of a single divine origin, a feminine power, from which all things are born. All of the primary creation myths from Egypt, from the cult centers of Memphis, Heliopolis, Hermopolis, and Thebes, have the same pre-existent, eternal deity described as this pre-creation monad, as the sole one, there before anything came to be. This deity is called Nun. And just like Tiamat from the Babylonian myth, she is identified with the primordial waters. Nun is that from which everything, including all the gods, were born. And while Nun is understood to be male, he is paired with a female consort, Naunet, who shares his name and essence. She is the echo and reminder of Nun's origin as the Great Mother. An ancient Egyptian text called Coffin Text 80 speaks from the mouth of the high god Atum, who describes Nun as his own womb and the womb of all the other gods. It reads like this: I was alone with the primeval ocean Nun. The gods of the first generation had not yet come into being, but they were with me. Right? The great God and all the other powers were there within the Great Mother, were there within the waters. And in ancient Mesopotamia, just as in Egypt, with Nun and Naunet, Tablet 1 of the Enuma Elish describes the primordial waters as the womb and generator of all the gods. We see again the masculine and feminine aspects together as one being, this time as the fresh water embodied by Apsu and the salt water embodied by Tiamat. And we've read it, but I'll read it again. When Apsu, the first one, their begetter, and Tiamat, she who bore them all, still mingled their waters together, then were the gods created within them. Then Anu, their son, was created. You see what I mean? And even as we move into the Indo-European world, we see the progenitor of the cosmos and of all the gods as a great mysterious feminine being. If we start with the famous Theogony of Hesiod, which dates to 700 BC, we read a line that goes like this: Verily at first chaos came to be. From chaos came forth Erebus and Black Night. Okay, for those who don't know, Chaos is a goddess, and she's opposite Cosmos, who is a god. Chaos and Cosmos. At first, it was chaos that came to be, and then chaos began to give birth to the other gods. Now, if we pry as deeply as we can into Greek history, we see an even more direct telling in the ancient Pelasgian creation myth, which was recreated by Robert Graves, and it opens like this. In the beginning, Eurynome, the goddess of all things, rose from chaos and divided the sea from the sky. She assumed the form of a dove brooding on the waves, and in due process of time laid the universal egg. Out tumbled all things that exist, her children. Right? There was one goddess there in the beginning, and from her come all things, the cosmos included. Now, with this pattern in mind, we can now firmly answer the question, where did the great God come from? He is born, the divine child of the great mother, and was there within her all along. A male child within the female goddess reflects, again, a kind of hermaphroditic image, as we saw in the Bible's description of God's image. And I can't help but even see this in the Taoist notion of the yin-yang as an image, as the same type of image, the white within the black, the masculine within the feminine. Now, the Egyptian example we read earlier illustrates the motif of the great God in the womb of the mother quite vividly. Atum says he was alone within Nun, and that while no gods had yet been born, already they were with me, he says. So the great God is born from her. Now we have parallel myths from Thrace where Dionysus, associated closely with the high god Zeus, is born from the great goddess Semele. In Babylonia, where the high god Anu is born from Tiamat, and in Egypt, where the divine child Horus is born from Isis. In each case, the god born of the goddess is uniquely venerated. Images of the mother Isis cradling the divine child Horus held specific mythological meaning, above and beyond the character of either deity. Now, there's something special about the divine birth itself. It was the divine son, born of the great mother, that is honored and emphasized. The birth of something new and unlike its progenitor, the male born of the female. This marks a kind of mystical transformation. The fact that this motif finds expression so early, across cultures seemingly independently, demands an explanation. The comparative approach provides fascinating insight into the universality of this religious intuition, but it also begs the question about its source. It must be a source common to humanity, right? If it appears everywhere across vast swaths of time, what could explain the universality of such an idea? What if it were attached to human psychology as well as human experience? What if it were something like an unconscious motif that finds expression in this way and in that? And this is exactly what depth psychology proposes. The psychologist Jordan Peterson, for instance, in his book Maps of Meaning, describes how, from a biological perspective, consciousness arises from unconsciousness. Okay? Human embryos are conceived into a kind of unconscious, instinctive existence, and only become conscious over the course of development. This motif is mirrored in metaphysics, where the unconscious fetal condition is projected onto the pre-creation cosmos, and the birth of creation is seen as synonymous with the birth of consciousness. This idea is expressed in mythology, the depository for so many archetypes, right? As the great mother and her divine child, as the unconscious and its offspring, consciousness. Dr. Peterson even lays down the psychological associations that explain why the unconscious is conceived of as female, while conscious is conceived as male. From a biological perspective, the feminine is associated with the creation of new life. The mystery surrounding this links her to the realm of the unknown. the idea of an unknown as the unknown, as a force for creation and a source of life, extends the metaphor into the psychological realm as the unconscious. The unknown now is linked to the unconscious. It's linked to life, and you start to get this constellation that forms. And as these ideas stack one upon the other, the human mind begins to imagine a mysterious something, which is dark, deep, and full of potential. In myth, it's nearly always described in terms of water. The primordial waters, the abyss, the waters of chaos. Just like an endless ocean, it is unexplored and therefore unknown. It is dangerous but full of potential. We cannot know what its dark depths may hold. Since the divine son born of the mother is the masculine spirit born of the feminine, we have a creation that opposes its origin. The masculine is the opposite of the feminine, after all, and we see this play out in our description of it. Since the feminine represents the unknown and unconscious aspects of reality, the divine son is therefore the realm of the known and consciousness itself. The great God born of the goddess. And now we can better see how these ideas imply and even necessitate one another. If the divine is the basis for all of reality, it must explain all of reality. This is why the divine is a hermaphrodite, why it is incomplete with just one side or the other alone. The world is both masculine and feminine, just as our experience is both conscious and unconscious. You cannot have one without the other, now can you? And so the divine child, consciousness, must be there within its unconscious origin, the Great Mother. How could she be a mother after all, if not for that mystery growing within her? Now, with all that said, I want to circle back to where we began, to our search for the divine feminine in the Bible. Now remember, what we're looking for is a great goddess from which the great God emerges. But in all our talk of Shekinah, Logos, Zoe, and Ashera, we fall short. These characters are at best described as with God from the beginning, but surely not God's origin. Surely not. Most academics claim that the inscription Yahweh and his Ashera points to a relationship of God and consort, as we saw with Ouranos and Gaia, or Odin and Frigg, husband and wife. They claim that the origins of the Israelite religion were polytheistic. They had many gods, of which Ashera is a memory of but one. The story in 2 Kings, where Ashera's idol was removed from the temple and destroyed, they claim points to a time when the Israelites still worshiped the great God along with his spouse. But is this so? Was Ashera the wife of God? Now, at this point, I want to introduce the biblical scholar Dr. Margaret Barker, who explored this topic in a recent book published in 2023 called The Great Lady. The Great Lady refers to this great goddess figure that I'm talking about. Now, in her book, she reveals that the Ashera spoken of in the Bible is none other than Atherat, the great mother goddess of the Canaanites. An interesting admission, given that the Israelites are but one tribe of the ancient Canaanite people. So, we now have Ashera in the role of the great mother, opposite the great god Yahweh. But this alone doesn't settle the question. Was she his consort or something else? The good news is Dr. Barker has another revelation in store. She tees it up by explaining the custom in the ancient world of giving gods and referring to gods and goddesses by titles, by honorary titles, often as a means of calling out their attributes, their unique attributes. So we spoke earlier about the Egyptian god Atum, and he was known, for instance, by the title, He Who Makes Himself into Millions. So if someone were to say, He Who Makes Himself into Millions, everyone would know that they're referring to Atum. Alternatively, the great goddess figure is commonly called across cultures things like the Queen of Heaven, the mother of the living, etc. And in Isaiah, in the book of Isaiah, Dr. Barker points out that Ashera is called the Virgin. Now, in an interview on the History Valley podcast, she explains, quote, "The passage in Isaiah chapter 7, taken by Christians to be a prophecy of Jesus, says, 'The virgin will bear a son and call his name Emmanuel.' Some of the translations say a virgin rather than the virgin, but the is clearly there. She is the virgin," unquote. Okay, she makes this distinction to show that a title is being used here. It refers not to just any virgin, but to the virgin, a title which needed no explanation to the people of the day. And then she drops an absolute atom bomb by pointing out a curious difference in the very oldest copy of the book of Isaiah that we have, dated to about the 3rd century BC. She says, quote, "Interestingly, in this chapter, there is a different text found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's almost exactly the same as the version we have today, with one or two differences, a letter here and there. But one is very important. When Isaiah is speaking to the king, he tells him to, quote, 'ask a sign from the Lord your God.' But the Qumran text says, quote, 'ask a sign from the mother of the Lord your God.' And in context, it looks like the virgin is the mother of the Lord. And this is where I differ from other scholars who suggest she was God's wife. Does the Lord have a wife? No, but he has a mother," unquote. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to my conclusion. The largest point that I want to make with all of this is to suggest that the idea of divinity in its earliest stage was conceived by humanity in the form of a goddess. And at this very early stage, deep into the Stone Age, there did not appear to be any other symbolic representation of God. There was only the goddess, a primitive kind of monotheism, Great Mother Monism. As civilization developed, however, and mankind came into contact with new forces and ideas beyond their own power, religion developed in concert. New gods and goddesses, new stories and myths came about to explain them. So powerful and fundamental was the great goddess motif, however, that it maintained a presence even in these new myths. The goddess, as the embodiment of divinity, became the great mother of all the other deities. Even as patriarchal society and their institutions came to dominate, she could not be fully forgotten. She had to instead be integrated in. And so we see again these classic images of the Egyptian Isis holding the baby Horus, the Babylonian Ishtar holding the baby Tammuz, and of course, the Virgin Mary holding the Christ child. In all of these, we have the Great Mother as the origin of the great God, indispensable to his existence. And Dr. Barker explains the symbolism here of the baby seated on the lap of the mother as the throne upon which sits the King of Kings. The God is the monarch, but she is the throne. She is his sovereignty. And Hesiod too makes the same claim in his Theogony by claiming the great goddess is the foundation of all the gods. He says, quote, "At the first, chaos came to be, the ever-sure foundations of all the deathless ones."
Well, there you have it. That's one avenue explored, but infinitely more still to go. I hope you enjoyed thinking along with us. I know. It's not easy work. Thinking. It's hard and full of uncertainties, but I'm grateful for the company as we trek through this together. Here's to hoping that the juice is worth the squeeze. See what I did there? Let's find out together in the next episode.